Come back to the series on MLflow GenAI tutorials. This is the first in the series, which gives you the ability to just set up your environment and start running the experiment. Now, if you have not listened to the introduction of tutorial or introduction video, go ahead and do that this time. Otherwise, just stay over here and we can just walk through this particular tutorial. It might take about 15 to 20 minutes, but it should be quite easy for those who are familiar with it or those who are completely new to it. Shouldn't be that difficult. So first, we're going to understand what is MLflow all about, why use MLflow for GenAI workflows. Then we'll go through the installation and configuration setup, and then we'll do our first execution run, and then navigate through the MLflow UI to see what we have tracked, what we have experimented, what we have run, and what some of the variables that we actually logged. And then we'll quickly verify our setup that everything is hunky-dory. Okay. So what are you going to learn from this? What is MLflow? Well, MLflow is the open source platform for managing your end-to-end lifecycle, for building and observing not only the traditional ML models, but more importantly today is the GenAI and LLM application, especially agent observability. And why you want to use MLflow? I think there are four reasons, really. One, that it is one of its own kind that actually allows you to give no lock-in in any specific cloud providers. You can run it on your laptop. And there is a Databricks version that actually gives you all the enterprise features such as governance and scale. But if you're getting started, this is a great way to use the open source on your local machine. It is compatible with any open telemetry. So if you're using any of the other agent development frameworks, you can actually use MLflow and have all your traces injected into it. All in one platform, unified to be able to do tracking, tracing, evaluation, and then continuous monitoring once it's actually deployment. And as I said earlier, it is integrated with a lot of common agentic development frameworks, so you can use that alongside MLflow. There are basically four pillars in GenAI platform architecture. One is tracing. Tracing is an important central part where you actually want to have a rich ability to look into what your agent is doing at every step of its trajectory from start to finish when you're actually trying to accomplish its task. It might be talking to other agents, it might be talking to a database, it might be doing a web search, it might be executing some local tools, it might be looking at some files. You want to have the ability to look into it, what's it talking to, what the parameters were sent, if it's a function call, and what was the duration? Because sometimes, these spans can have a high latency. So you want to somehow figure out where the bottleneck is. So this is a good way for you to do that. The second big pillar in MLflow is the evaluation frameworks. MLflow provides you over 670 plus built-in third-party and custom judges that you can actually write, and also has the ability for you to provide human feedback. So then your agents can somehow take the feedback and then improve on its next iterations. The evaluation framework is a comprehensive set of not only agent dashboards you can look into it, but also the ability to actually use all the LLM metrics, which is a rich suite of metrics. The third pillar is the prompt registry. And this allows you to track your agent parameters, to track your prompts, to version the prompts, and to also optimize your prompts when you actually have the baseline. So prompt registry is an important part in the entire agent development cycle. And last but not least, you actually want to have some sort of a gateway by which you can control and audit who is actually doing what LLMs were called, and provide agent that particular access. So those are the four things. So let's go to the introduction. I've already installed using the install.f requirements, but I'm using UV sync to install all the dependencies. So I prefer using UV package. So I would advise you to read that particular file. Readme.file has instructions how to use UV, and there is a project.poml file that you can just use UV sync, and it will install all the packages for you. That way you have your virtual environment, you're isolated, you're working with this environment, and it doesn't have to interfere with your local Python packages. So let's go ahead and see what I've installed over here. I'm just going to quickly run that to see I have 3.9 installed, and I have OpenAI 2.0 version. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an env file. Now, this is an important bit because you don't want to have all your Open API keys or your Anthropic keys to be sitting in the tutorial. Python has the ability to provide you a .env file where you can create that, put your credentials in there, it reads it, and now you have all your environment variables that you can actually see. So no, you're not exposing any of the API keys. What I've done is, because I'm using both the Databricks foundational models using the gateway, I have an ability to sort of toggle back and forth, because if my OpenAI keys, if my OpenAI tokens usage is actually increasing and I'm burning a lot of money, I can always switch to using the Databricks because it's free for me. I work for Databricks, so I have the ability to toggle between that. But you don't have to. You can just use your OpenAI keys. But the way the tutorials are set up is that you can either of those for your own benefit, whichever suits you. So this now tells me I'm using the OpenAI keys because that's how they are configured. And this is actually a recommended practice that you use .env file to do that. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually start the tracking server. Now the tracking server can actually run on your local server. And the way you start tracking server is just you execute MLflow server. Once you actually install that from this particular local directory, it will start on port 5000. This should be port 5000. And then you can just view the GUI on that particular local machine. And now let's do our first tracking setup. We're going to go ahead and set our tracking URL to be this particular local server because that's where we actually want to log all of the metrics. So I'm just going to make the second track, setting the URI to be that. It actually prints out showing this is where I am going to be logging all the metrics, and this is going to be storing into the local SQLite. And I'm going to create the first experiment by the name of setup a verification. So this is a way you can set an experiment, and then anything you do after that is going to be logged towards that particular experiment. And we'll see that in GUI, what does it mean. Now we're going to do our first run. And run is an important concept in MLflow. Run allows you to have the ability to iterate and run many times if you actually want to do an iterative process. And you can have one run or you can have multiple runs associated with experiments. So here I only have one run, but it's going to be tied to the experiment that I created earlier. So we're going to go ahead and create this particular run, and we're just going to log some basic parameters just for you to understand how you can actually use these parameters and how you can actually log these parameters and how you can actually access those parameters in the UI. So we're going to go ahead and run this particular experiment, and all I'm going to do is create a bunch of log parameters. I'll create a file as an artifact, which is a text file. I can create a metric that actually takes some real numbers and some ints, and then I'm going to log some parameters that which we will look at that. And what it did was it actually ran that particular experiment, created the particular run, gave me a session ID, and that's what the run is going to be identified in the database. And then I can always look at this particular run experiment in the GUI. So congratulations, you actually had your first MLflow installed, you configured your environment, you created a particular experiment, you logged your first run. So let's go ahead and go to the UI over here. I'm going to go back to the UI running on my port 5000. And you can see I created this particular experiment that actually says setup is configured. I'll click on that experiment. Now I actually have the runs. It automatically detects whether you're actually using the GenAI platform or you're actually using the traditional machine learning algorithm. Nothing over here I did that actually triggered it to say I'm using GenAI platform. But in the next tutorial, we'll see how it actually automatically switches between the platforms. It's quite good in confirming that. So I'll confirm that, and I have my setup test as my first run. If I click on that particular run, I get all the modal metrics, all the metrics that I logged in my first run. I had a metric that is success. I had a timestamp associated with that. I had a couple of parameters that I loaded, as you can see. So I have my hello LMFlow, my framework that I used. If there are any modal metrics, here it would be tagged as my modal metrics. If I have system metrics, they will come up here. And if I was using the MLflow tracing ability, I would see all my traces over here. So this was actually your first experiment. So let's go back over here and look at what we have done in terms of verification list. So I'm going to have this little function that will run and then verify that, yes, I've installed 3.9. I have an Open SDK installed. I have my APIs for OpenAI configured. I'm using the tracking server locally on my machine, and all the experiments actually worked fine. So the first tutorial is done. And these are some of the commands that some of the APIs that you actually be using in this particular tutorial. So just to summarize, you learned about the 5 pillars in the GenAI platform for OpenAI. One is the tracing ability for you to actually trace the entire trajectory of your LLM or your agent operations it performs. And each trace has multiple span. So if you have any kind of tool calling, if you have any interaction with the outside agent that's talking to the web server or looking up at the database, you will see all those traces. We had an understanding of what the 4 pillars are and how they actually work together. We installed the dependencies for that. We configured an environment using our API keys. We looked at how to set up your tracking server local machine. We had a good idea to see what it looks like in the UI, and we verified our setup using that. So that was essentially a very first, very basic tutorial to get started. And now we'll go to the next one where we actually do the experiment tracking. So thank you.